All right, so there's a couple things I've been noticing that we've been running into, and those are stretching and smoothing. So smoothing is something I mentioned early on, but in case it's something that you missed, if you notice here on this, you can still see like the geometry. And sometimes you want that. Like I think that it's kind of like this thing where if it has really minimal geometry, it looks okay. But in the case of like this cylinder, it almost has too much that you want to throw some kind of smoothing effect on it. So if I go to select it, if I go to object, I can shade it smooth, I can shade it auto smooth or shade flat. Right now it's shaded flat. So I go to shade smooth. It's going to round out some of those harder angles. Sometimes shade auto smooth will do the trick as well, but really trying to avoid some of these more harsh curves. And sometimes you might even have to change your geometry to make sure that it reacts and shades the way you want it to. Now let's look at stretching. And if you notice, here I've kind of found some extreme examples of like really how far this thing can really be bad on stretching. It's when your UVs aren't lining up how you want to. So if I go to my UV editing over here, and with this selected, you can kind of see if I go select all, you can see how all of these are actually laid out, and it's really chaotic and not really that helpful. So kind of like the quick fix or like the first thing I want you to check is over in object mode, if you go to object and apply transforms, and you have to reset um, some of these values essentially back to zero after you've kind of modified it and built something. So if I go to apply all transforms, now let's go to edit with this selected. And now if I do a UV unwrap, I think again, like kind of like the quick way to do it to kind of get a decent start on an unwrap is this just this smart UV project. So if I do that, hit unwrap, you notice how it lines up my UVs on a lot cleaner um, version of it. I mean, some of them still aren't totally perfect. There's some stretching, but it's a lot better. So if you want, you can go through and you can actually select some of these. If you go to select linked, it'll kind of group whatever these, however the smart UV separated it and kind of move it around. And then you can kind of see if you notice here over, it's kind of hard to see, but you could scale this up as well and make it smaller or bigger. You don't want these to overlap at all. Um, you want to keep them separate. And this is because, we'll learn a little bit about why this affects it when you actually are exporting this out to game engines. It can cause some issues, but for the most part, try to have it nice and evenly laid out so there's no overlapping. There's also a setting on Smart UV Unwrap where you can have these island margins where you can have a little bit of a separation there. And that's what that does. It kind of separates these even more so. So there's more of a gap between these. And again, for the most part, that should solve most of your UV unwrapping projects. But if you're still having issues where you're like, well, I want some more control over it. Well, you can always create seams. And you do that again in edit mode. And you do that by selecting edge loops or lines and showing where you actually want these UVs to cut. So say if I wanted it to cut just this top line here, I'm going to hold down Control and I'm going to select this whole top. And then I'm going to go to Edge, Mark Seam. And that's going to control where this thing unwraps. And then I'll do the same thing down here. Then I go to Edge, mark seam. And then since this, if I can't unwrap this whole section here because it's almost like a tube. So I would have to add a line here and go to edge, mark seam. And this again is kind of the tedious approach. Sometimes you can, for the most part, get it done with just smart unwrap, but not always. And then I can go to UV, or I go to edge and I go to mark seam. And the same thing with these are all going to essentially the same. And then again, since to avoid this tube, I can go to and then go throughout and do that for the rest as well. All right. And I think that's everything I want to unwrap. I feel like everything should come out as a nice flat plane. So if I go to select, go back to face mode, select all. And this time, if I go to UV, I'm just going to do angle based. Oh, and you notice that one kind of unwrapped a little bit at an angle because of how this bevel is working. But everything else, if you notice, it has unwrapped it. Now I have more control over how I can lay these out. So I might do one more like right in the center here. So I might add like along here to add another seam. So if I go to, let's see where I have my other one, right there. Let's just try doing it on the opposite. This might just allow it to lay a little bit more flat. Edge, mark seam. And then if I go to face mode, select all, UV unwrapped. That's a little bit better. And I could even move some of this around so it fits a little bit better. So now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and move some of these around so they kind of sit better. So if I were to select this, select all, oh, just kidding. If I go to select, and again, if I go to select linked, it's going to select just this section in here. Now I'm just going to move this out of my way for now. I'll do the same thing here, select, select, linked, and I'm going to move that out of the way. And then this is my top and bottom surface. I just know that's my bottom because there's a little bit of holes in here. So I'm not that as concerned about that being as detailed as my top. So that's something to think about too, is like, what are the visibilities? So I go to select, well, let's move the bottom out of the way. So I'll go to select, select linked. And then I can go ahead and rotate this around. I'll scale this up. So I want to save room for my other objects as well. So that looks pretty decent. And then same thing with my legs. So I'll go select, select linked. And the thing with these is I want the wood grain to be up and down. And that's something like with certain textures, you kind of want to notice like, okay, which way makes most sense for this to be laying. And select. Select linked. I can clean this up and try to be as efficient as the space as you can. Like I could probably even take these legs, and since they're kind of flared, just kind of fit them like so they're in and out opposites too. Oh, I did not want to scale it. I want to rotate it. And then I could even select this bottom. And again, I'm trying to fit it on here. And again, the bottom, I mean, for the most part, you're not going to see too often, depending on your angle. But let's go ahead and just kind of take a look at it so far. Already, like the legs look a lot better. I could probably even add some more lines of shape here. The last part is this edge in here. And that's something that I can kind of show you a couple tips on. If I go back to, I can move these around. Well, and line them up like that. But it's still going to have this weird angle. So I can actually even move these sections on here and move them into a place that's more, so they're all even. So they're all parallel. So my kind of favorite way of doing that, just kind of selecting a row and then scaling them all so they're down to like 0 on one of my axes. It's usually wide. And then I can do the same thing for the last two. I'm kind of being lazy. I'm kind of eyeballing it. So I'm doing 0. And then just so you can see how I'm like lining these edges up with a grain. I think there's two sides to this, right? Yep. So one side, if you notice, is actually where we want it, where the grain's running one way. And the other one, I have to make that adjustment. And looking at this too, I could probably make the legs a little bit bigger and start being more finicky about if I have the space for it too. Then I can select these. And if I wanted to scale these up a little bit more, and kind of use this space as much as I can. Maybe those look a little bit better, a little bit more accurate. I might even try to like make some more space in here for the legs, just because again, they're going to be seen a little bit more so than um, the rest of it too. That one edge is bugging me. I should do that. And then I would probably at least add some, like I'll add a bevel to it after I've kind of done my main. And why I like kind of doing it sometimes after I've kind of done some of my texturing is that it's easier to work with a little bit lower amount of geometry than um, it was if I make it too complicated. Again, I might make the legs a little bit more interesting. so on. And then you can also add, if you can also work in backwards too. If you wanted to actually take this UV layout, and again, I should probably go through and modify this other side here as well, but for just kind of like the speed of this tutorial, I'll leave it alone for now. But we can also export this out. If I go to over here in my image screen and I go to oh, I gotta go edit mode, and then I'll select it again. And if I go to UV, I can go to export UV layout. And then I will call this one table UV layout. And then what that'll do, and then you can bring it into like a photo editing software, an image editing software like Photoshop, and it'll actually give you the layout of your UVs. And then you can actually really get specific about where your textures will lay out. If you wanted to, bring in your wood texture, and then you can start really scaling this up to how big you actually need it. And then what'll allow you to do too is fit a lot more texturing data on one sheet. And you can get to a thing where they call it a texture atlas, where you're actually using one texture, one material file for a bunch of other textures. And this is just efficiency for like programming and making games, because it allows you to, again, like you're doing less draw calls and you're having to, instead of like putting a bunch of materials and textures into one file, you can kind of do it all in one and it saves you space. And again, there's a point of diminishing returns on like resolution and how big you do this. But keep in mind too, it's why it's kind of good practice to have clean UVs in the beginning and have everything kind of organized, because it'll work into more efficient systems as you build.